All right, so today we're going to talk about life after the AI bubble. Obviously, everyone is talking about this AI bubble ever since Sam Altman let it slip in some podcast a couple of weeks ago. I think the first question to ask is like, first, is there even an AI bubble? I think yes, obviously there's a bubble. But the stock market really is ultimately a test of faith in the future, right? It's a combination of expectations of the future, past performance, and ultimately like what people are willing to pay for a share of the company, right? This is nothing new if you know anything about the economy or the stock market or went to school through high school, probably. But we need to create two buckets, right? We need to create a bucket for like the behemoths, the large players that essentially account for like a vast majority of the economy. I think it's like they account for like 80% of the economy, and all other businesses, right? If you've been following the economy at all, or news about the economy, especially in the US, the biggest headline almost every week is, hey, our entire economy is essentially propped up by the large AI companies, right? Tesla, Nvidia, Microsoft, Google, etc. Google, Alphabet, etc. And the rest of the economy is not doing that great, right? Especially when it comes to the labor market, and retail businesses and businesses on like below that kind of like high water mark of like you are a Mag 7 company, a huge behemoth. The OpenAI, Google, Microsoft, Anthropic, Oracle, and others of the world are basically valued based on the market's belief in their ability to provide real economic value in the future and the amount of revenue they can expect to produce as a result, right? But will they meet these expectations? So fundamentally, what these companies are pitching is, hey, if we're able to crack this AI thing, and crack meaning like we can lay the foundation for AI to scale infinitely over time, pretty much infinitely over time, that's going to equate to an almost unquantifiable amount of economic value for the economy as a whole, right? And so it's justified that the value of our companies is going to be astronomical, and the investment that we're making in this endeavor is, you know, reasonable, right? If not like the thing to do. So are they going to meet these expectations? Well, if these players are successful at creating superintelligence, developing multi-purpose humanoid robots, and building the infrastructure to support this tech, then the value they provide to the economy is almost unquantifiable, like I'm saying, right? Like intelligence on tap that's, beyond human intelligence, humanoid robots that can do whatever a human body can do, and the infrastructure to support and scale that over time. Uh, there's almost like there's no way to kind of calculate the value that that's going to provide, right? Because we're essentially replicating a human. We're essentially creating a superhuman in some ways. Now, obviously, this is like sci-fi-esque. It's like how realistic is this future between like what we have available today versus like that crazy future. We'll likely land somewhere in between, but at least directionally, we're going that way, right? And it seems like we're going to get to something like this. Like it seems inevitable that we're going to get to something like this given the amount of investment dollars and the minds working on this problem. And all other businesses, let's say they check off those boxes, all other businesses will inevitably adopt AI for the explicit purpose of increasing operational efficiency and output, right? Meaning that the value of all other businesses will increase as a result. This fact here does not seem baked into the market yet, right? What does seem baked into the market is that these companies are making massive investments in AI infrastructure, and those investments are going to produce massive amounts of revenues for the company downstream. That seems to be baked in. What doesn't seem to be baked in is like, if true, if you believe in that, then the economy overall should increase massively in value as well, right? Because all of the businesses are now using this tool or these tools that increase their operational efficiency, increase the value of their output, right? Ideally, decrease costs as well for the end consumer, but overall, the value of all of the businesses who do adopt AI uh, increase in value, right? That's a fundamental fact that seems to be kind of like where the line is drawn, right? When it comes to valuing these companies, because you could argue that like Nvidia should be valued more than it is currently. No one's arguing that though, or some are. But with that said, these companies, these large behemoths, will not be able to achieve their earnings projections, which will likely cause an instant sell off of those shares. So, what happens if you don't know is publicly traded companies project the amount of revenue that they're going to make quarter by quarter. So Nvidia will say, hey, we're going to make a $200 billion in Q4, and every quarter they're having a essentially like a shareholder meeting where they're like, hey, we projected we're going to hit this quarter. We actually hit this, or we actually hit this, right? Nvidia has recently been, setting really high projections and exceeding those projections, which is why things feel so frothy, which is why Nvidia's stock price has skyrocketed. It's partly why we're seeing circular investment in the space. Nvidia has a ton of cash, and there's also a ton of demand. And in order to, get the GPUs or the chips that, OpenAI, Microsoft, and others need from Nvidia, they need the cash to buy it. And so Nvidia is giving them the cash to buy it, essentially, which is kind of crazy. And so why would Nvidia not reach their earning projections? I'm sticking with Nvidia for now. Well, it might be because competitors start to capture some share of the market, right? Like AMD or Intel come out with a brand new chip, and now instead of Nvidia like taking over 100% of the market pretty much, when it comes to AI chips, it's Intel is now taking 20% of that, right? And so the market has shrunk. There's more competitors, or demand has slowed considerably, right? There's like an overabundance. There's a surplus of demand right now for Nvidia chips. Maybe that slows, and maybe that's why they don't hit their earnings projections. But no one really knows like what exactly is going to be the reason. But it likely will happen at some point, right? Whether they put out a projection that's less than what people would expect, or they put out a projection and they don't meet that. They don't actually generate as much revenue as they're projecting, right? Whatever it is, and whatever the reason behind it is, doesn't necessarily matter. What does matter is that when it does happen, we're going to see a market correction. And this will be the moment where people start to say, oh, yeah, we were in an AI bubble and it's popping, right? You can't really say you're in a bubble until it's already popped. But I think enough of us have been through these cycles before. Seems like the cycle of like bubbles being generated and popping is happening more and more, especially when interest rates went down and capital became very cheap. The likelihood of a bubble happening kind of increased, right? And we're seeing some we're seeing the interest rates go down again. We're seeing capital become cheap again, which means that there's probably going to be more speculative bets, especially when it comes to AI, which means that the bubble's going to continue to expand, right? Whatever, doesn't matter. Eventually, the stock price for all these businesses is going to be corrected because they're not going to be able to like reach the high highs that they were originally reaching. Right now, it's just like it's insane, right? Because there's just a blue ocean. People will scream bubble. They'll say, "Hey, the bubble's popping, whatever," and we'll see we'll see all the charts go down and down and to the right. We'll see it all go red for a bit, but it'll be a correction, right? Some will say this is huge, right? The bubble's popped. The heyday is over, and others will say, "Hey, this is just a light correction. It's fine." But either way, values are going to drop, and people are going to say, "Hey, the AI market is crashing." That's going to happen. It's unknown how significant this correction will be, like I said, but I think it'll largely will depend on the amount of real economic value AI is providing to the broader market, specifically the application layer. I think this is the key because this will essentially define AI's value in the economy and also increase demand overall. Demand's already insane, mainly because the model providers need capacity, right? They need to scale compute. And so like they are the drivers of demand, and then they're offering their products to the broader market at a reduced rate where they're like losing money. They could increase the price. That will hurt kind of demand. It'll also hurt the data feedback loop that they need to improve their product. So there's a lot of reasons why they won't increase the price, but they are the main drivers of demand. When it gets to a point where AI is like, I absolutely need AI in my business or else we're going to fail, that's where the demand for AI products and especially like chips is going to just skyrocket, right? Because the pressure won't just be on the large players who need the chips to build their models. The pressure is going to be on everybody at that point. This is kind of the key point here, right? Like the size of this correction, how big this pop is going to be, is going to largely depend on how effective AI is in the real world. How effective is it at actually providing real economic value to these businesses? But it seems like the most likely scenario is that we live in a world where the large players see a price correction, right? NVIDIA doesn't meet their earnings projection, or competitors come and take some of the market, and the stock market goes negative because the large players are kind of like it's top heavy, right? We have a top heavy economy. They account for like I think it's like 80% of the value of the economy, something crazy. It might not be up to 80, but something crazy. But we'll see the market go negative because of this, right? But the demand for Gen AI, for LLMs, will continue to grow across the wider market. We saw this with the internet, right? Just because the dot-com bubble happened and it burst and tons of companies went out of business and like the market corrected itself, the demand for the internet was still, exponentially going up. Um, But if this scenario is true, which I think it is, then the pop won't be more than a blip. I think we're gonna have cycles of pops, right? Like we have this initial bubble that's expanding, that will eventually pop. The market will correct. We'll have the next bubble, which I'll get into in a second, but we'll have the next bubble that will expand, that will likely pop, right? And then we'll probably have a next bubble, right? So this will be cyclical. We still haven't reached the first bubble yet. I can feel it coming though, mainly because people are starting to get a little bit more smart about how they invest in AI from a real world perspective. We've seen a lot of like negative articles come out about like 91% of AI projects are failing. I think MIT did a study on that a few months ago, which like 90% of AI projects are failing. You know, Essentially what's happening is like, is AI actually providing the promised value to the real economy? Or not, right? And they're arguing not, right? And now who's behind that? Who's paying for those articles? Like what is their bias? All of that stuff I think is up for debate, but it is a question being asked at this point, right? So whether it's a blip or something much more significant, we will turn a corner and enter a new chapter in the AI saga, right? And this chapter, I think, will be all about applied AI or the application layer. I think at this point, especially once the bubble bursts, the question really becomes, how can I use AI, and is AI providing real economic value to the economy, but like real specifically to my business, right? Is it providing like statistically significant value to my business or not, right? Like that question is going to be like ultimately core. And I think we'll have a lot more proof points, a lot more case studies. The question will be easier to answer at this point. So life after the bubble, I think will be a lot more sane, data-driven, and intentional, right? Businesses will no longer be willing to invest in experimental pilots, and strong frameworks for implementing AI will be established. I think the frameworks for implementing AI into businesses are getting established now. We have our own framework, right? But they're going to be more widely adopted, more widely known at this point. I also think the frameworks for deciding on how to make an investment in AI for your business or which investments to make, I think those kind of like decision-making frameworks will also be a little bit more established as well, right? So people are going to be a lot more, it's going to be a lot less of like early adopters and more, people who are a little bit more skeptical, right? The early majority, the late majority comes into vogue, and they're a lot more skeptical in how they make decisions. They're not ready to just hop on AI because it says AI, right? Or has some AI feature. They're looking at spreadsheets to make their decisions mostly. I think at this point, though, we'll see an even larger explosion of like AI integrators, AI transformation teams, system integrators, whatever you want to call them. But people who do kind of custom implementation of AI into a business. At this point, it's going to be clear that, okay, hey, all of these wrappers, these vertical AI products, whatever, right? All of this stuff, the bubble bursts. Maybe there's a washout of kind of like startups who are taking the wrong approach. It depends on how big the bubble is, right? Or depends on how big the correction is ultimately. But at this point, it'll be like businesses, they know they need to adopt AI. They don't want to just waste money on it. They want to make the right strategic approach, and they need consultants and they need custom implementers to come in and do it for them, right? I don't think that right away we're going to have broad-based like application layer products yet. At this point, I think to get the true value, you can probably get a lot of value out of AI, probably 60 to 80% of value out of AI using like off-the-shelf products or kind of like building one-off kind of agents or workflows that have LLM elements to it. But if we're talking about end-to-end systems, if we're talking about foundational operating systems that kind of like run your business in the background, that handle the software activities of the business itself, that provide that paradigm shift that we're talking about, it's still going to have to be a custom implementation for the time being, right? Right now, there's like everyone can see this, right? There's an explosion of infrastructure level tooling in the market, what people typically call like picks and shovels, right? The picks and shovels thing comes from like the gold rush. People were flooding to the West Coast in the US, specifically California, because people found gold over there. So people wanted to go, they want to go dig for gold. And a lot of people made a lot of money selling picks and shovels to people who wanted to go be gold diggers, right? Because they knew, hey, there's a market. People want to be gold diggers. They need picks and shovels. This is a little bit more guaranteed. I could go out there and I could dig for gold and try to find a big win, but that's a little bit more risky. That's kind of a gamble. Let me just sell to the gamblers. That's kind of where we are right now in the AI space. A lot of picks and shovels. A lot of people building, secure API pipelines or, vector databases and RAG was a new innovation that came out of this. Then now we're seeing like RAG as a service, or we've been seeing those like RAG as a service companies, and all of the kind of scaffolding and the tools needed to just get LLMs to do what you want them to do, right? Like ultimately, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to get the LLMs to do what we want them to do, and they're targeted towards these tools are targeted towards system integrators, the people actually implementing AI to businesses, not necessarily the last mile business. And it's like system integrators, it's also like internal dev teams, but it requires development regardless, right? A development team or development person. And there's a large and growing market of these tools because LLMs are hard to work with, like I said. That's fundamentally what it comes down to. Tools that solve data security, integration protocols, observability, agent orchestration, memory, etc., are all useful and necessary when implementing AI into a real business. But the customers for these tools are either internal dev teams tasked with upgrading the company's AI stack or third party integrators who do the same, right? This is kind of where we're seeing the startup landscape really where the activity is, right? Like there's some vertical plays, but really like who's excited about that ultimately. It also doesn't skate to where the puck is going necessarily. It is a good shot, I think, when trying to uh, provide an application layer product to the end customer ultimately that doesn't require like hands-on implementation. But if we're talking about end-to-end like scalable systems, operating systems that are foundational, it's going to require integrators ultimately. That's why the tools that are being built, the startups that are being built, are mainly for this cohort of people, right? Like not to the end customer, but to the people who actually work with the end customer. We're not seeing a ton of last mile applications hit the market yet. Last mile meaning end customer. Sure, there are vertical AI applications launching every day, but these applications are functionally hard-coded, deterministic workflows with limited LLM exposure. How agentic really are these ultimately, right? Because the AI landscape is brand new, these applications function pretty much like your typical SaaS platform rather than something that's truly agentic in nature. This is largely because the infrastructure to support agentic applications hasn't fully matured yet. That's the biggest reason. But I also think that there's deterministic software and then there's agentic software. Agentic software gives you agility, flexibility. It allows you to scale up, scale down the capability set. It allows you to add or subtract new workflows automatically. In the truest case of agentic. But right now, what we're basically trying to do is say, hey, I'm essentially providing a SaaS product that's got LLM capabilities, which makes it like better, right? Because now instead of like providing you just like a blank document, it's actually a document filled with a bunch of text that you can like review, right? So we save you a bunch of hours on time, which is huge ultimately, but it's not really end to end. It's still driven by the human, by the user. It's focused on one workflow. If you try to add more capability to it, if you try to ask it to do other things, it's not going to be able to do those other things because it's just essentially just been constrained to just like a one use case tool at this point. And it's essentially just a SaaS product with like LLM sprinkled in. It's not an agentic application. And I think it's largely because the infrastructure hasn't been set up yet for agentic applications to truly be like self-serve, sign up, SaaS. Now this is burgeoning. This might happen like way sooner than I think, but I think we're probably a year away from this. But if you want to provide real value to the end customer, the only real way to do it right now is to do hands-on implementation. Custom implementation will be the name of the game until there's a more robust foundation for building last mile applications. This foundation might be after the AI bubble bursts, but I have no doubt that manual implementation will be a requirement for some time. So if we look at the software industry when it first started, it required setting up servers, it required flying out to the customer and like implementing the software package. It required hands-on implementation. Like it wasn't necessarily, I guess there are some where you could just download it to your computer, but even before that you couldn't, right? It's like you had to like build it internally, or you had to like buy it from a team that would come in and manually implement it for you. It wasn't until, broadband, it wasn't until the 15 years of just infrastructure building for the internet got built, and then cloud computing ultimately, where the SaaS model could really like take hold, right? How do you get a bunch of customers onboarded, and how do you build a product that is like custom enough to serve their specific use cases? And you can say, okay, well, like we'll create buckets of industries or sectors, and we'll say, hey, this industry, they have like a lot of commonalities. They're all kind of built and scaled the same way. Let's build a tool for this industry, right? So they can come in, they can self sign up. They would be the ones who have to input all their data, and basically put in to the tool what they're ultimately going to get out of the tool, right? Like I imagine, for example, I imagine there's a lot of companies out there who have a CRM and like hardly use it, right? Or just don't use all of the functionality, don't get all the functionality out of it that they could, right? So they're just using it to just store their contacts essentially. Um, but it's on the company on how much value they're getting out of it, right? So this kind of like self-serve, use it how you want system, it isn't built yet for agentic. Um, and everyone wants to map it to SaaS, but it's different, right? Because when you start mapping it to SaaS, then you start having, there's a lot of constraints, right? Because then you're starting to build more deterministic workflows, more deterministic functions. The more you want to turn it into a SaaS, the less agentic it becomes, and ultimately you just end up building a SaaS product. You're not building an agentic application fundamentally. So especially if you want the SaaS scaling mechanisms, right, and the SaaS margins. So the question ultimately becomes, talking about the AI bubble, can AI implementation teams scale fast enough to deploy high impact AI solutions for a statistically significant size of the market? The reason this is the question is because if every business is like, I want to adopt AI and I know how to do it, I need the team to come and do it. And they can do it. They can do it quickly. They can do it at scale. And it actually provides the before and after transformation that everybody's been promising, and it's proven. Then every company's going to want it. The demand for these solutions skyrockets, meaning that OpenAI was right to lose a bunch of money to make their product better, and they're also right to buy a bunch of like chips from Nvidia, and Nvidia is going to continue to make more money because now the end customer, the rest of the world, right, the other businesses are fiending for AI at this point. Right now, there's still like first of all, vast majority of people don't really know what AI can even like do necessarily. They know what it is, kind of what it is, and kind of, ChatGPT, but like not really how it can be implemented end to end. A lot of people don't trust AI. A lot of businesses are kind of like playing the wait game. Some people are apathetic at this point. So at this point, the whole economy, all businesses aren't all bought in of like, we need to adopt AI. I think they probably were like a year ago, and that's when things were like really frothy and the hype was going crazy, and people were screaming bubble back then. That has kind of died out a little bit because people made a lot of mistakes, right? You're throwing stuff at the wall, seeing what sticks. Not everything's going to stick, obviously. So like people have scars from that time. Uh, but when it's like, and now they're getting skeptical, and now, there's negative sentiment in some ways, and all of this stuff, right? But if you can show like a quick implementation, a very small, very short time to value equation, if you can do the value equation period that makes sense for them, uh, and it's repeatable and you can implement it, even if it's hands-on implementation, the market frothiness is going to skyrocket right back up. Everybody's going to want to get AI products implemented or AI solutions implemented into their business, right? And so demand's going to go back up. So the question was, right, can we do this fast enough as implementation teams? If we can, the size of the overall economy will grow as non-AI businesses become more efficient and expand their offerings, right? If we can implement AI, we show statistically significant value. And part of that statistically significant value is like the business is not growing faster, it's growing much larger, the margins are way better, right? If that's happening at a broad-based scale, um, then the value of the economy will go up, right? Even if we see like a correction on the big players, the underlying economy still might grow in value. If not, if we're unable to basically figure out frameworks for like highly scalable, reliable, high value AI solutions implemented into businesses for a statistically significant amount of customers or businesses in the economy, then I think the economy is going to crash, and tech talent and investment dollars will consolidate into like the big players essentially. And while I think we have another upswing again, I think this is like a much longer, trough of sorrow, so to speak. It's kind of like in the book Foundation, Isaac Asimov, where it's like, hey, uh, you know, big empire, the our galactic empire or whatever is going to essentially crash and burn, and we're going to go through like 10,000 years of darkness. But if we, make all these right moves, it can actually be like just 1,000 years of darkness, right? The darkness is coming. It's just like how long and how much suffering do we have to deal with? Kind of depends on what we do now, right? As companies continue to invest in custom solutions, the implementers themselves will uncover last mile product opportunities. We will have built these solutions with a box of scraps and have been the ones on the front lines, right? So what it took to build a software product back in the day was like servers and you had to do all the stuff. Now what it takes is like a laptop and a Wi-Fi connection, right? So back then it cost a lot of money, it took a lot of time, and you didn't have like mature tools to do it with, right? That's where we're at with AI. Obviously, things will improve down the line, but the people who've been doing it with the box of scraps will be in the best possible position to identify when the right time is to productize, right? And what the defensibility is of those products, and ultimately like what these products even look like, right? Because I think we all imagine they look pretty much like SaaS products, but they could look different. Ultimately, who knows? We will know what provides real value. We know how to build it, and the last thing to do will be removing ourselves from the process of getting it implemented. This is like poorly worded, but uh, essentially it's like, hey, we've been talking to real customers, we've been building real solutions that are providing real value. We can see it firsthand, the effect, the transformation that our system and our solution is providing. Uh, you know, this has required like custom hands-on manual implementation. Now the challenge is how do we kind of like automate the onboarding, right? How do we remove ourselves from the implementation process? That's where we need to get to ultimately for it to be kind of like a highly scalable SaaS like uh, industry. For those of us on the forefront of applied AI or application layer deployments, our current challenge is to use the tools we have available to us to build high impact solutions that solve real business problems. And this requires us to be hands on and in the weeds with our clients. It's the only way to do it for now. It really is the only way to do it. If we're talking about like high impact solutions, right? End to end agentic solutions that are flexible, scalable, reliable. Um, and like a lot of our, so not a lot, a handful of our solutions are, it's a double-edged sword, right? Because if we do it well, it's huge for the business, but it means that an entire team basically just became obsolete overnight. But that means that's a huge thing, right? Like if our client is now firing 33 people, keeping two, out of the 35 because of our solution, extrapolate that across like multiple businesses across multiple industries. This is a huge, and now this is what I'm talking about speed of deployment for implementers, right? If that is happening at a grand scale, right? Like tons of businesses and industries and tons of integrators are doing this level of transformation, the our world looks a lot different at that point, and ultimately like the bubble popping and a correction happening won't be as severe as it might be, right? If that's not the case, right? If there's not a broad-based adoption of AI that because it's providing like true value and it's like proven and it's no longer like an experimental investment at this point. It's real. But the only way to really do it is hands-on implementation, right? You got to get into the weeds. SaaS needed broadband, the internet, and cloud computing infrastructure. to for the SaaS model that we know today to exist, agentic AI will need its own foundation. I think it's going to be a Web3 foundation, and I can make a video about that's a whole rabbit hole there. But and I'm not alone in thinking that it's going to be a Web3 foundation. I totally think it's going to have to be built on the blockchain. There's going to have to be agent to agent communication. LLM's got to have to traverse a digital landscape and work together throughout that with proper security protocols. This is a whole new foundational infrastructure that's going to need to be built for like highly scalable agentic AI to essentially like become, the new software paradigm for us, which is where we're going ultimately. So if we're able to trigger as integrators, as implementation specialists, as consultants, whatever you want to say, a product-led deployment teams, right? Which is what we're doing. If we're able to trigger a massive paradigm shift in the way businesses operate and scale, the demand for LLM-based solutions will skyrocket and another bubble will start to grow. This is it. This is where I stop with this video. I might get into what the next bubble is, but TLDR on that. It's essentially like, okay, all of these custom implementers, all of these system integrators are providing like real deal economic value, and they can charge like a high price for this because they're working with a box of scratch. This is new technology, and the skill set to do it is pretty rare. And so like the price to do it is going to be pretty high. And then over time, like, more people start to compete, the tools get better, the prices come down, right? Because you got to start competing on price, especially if you're a new player. And it's only until like the prices come down to a point where, hey, we're in a new paradigm where like this infrastructure is built and now scalable agentic AI functions kind of like how SaaS did, where it's like, without AI, I can build a SaaS product in a month and, put it out there to sell, and I can start getting MRR going as like a solo founder, as like a hacker. Like, if it gets to a point where it's like that, then the whole system integrator, spend $1 million to get this implemented, game will still exist, right? Just like it still does with software, but it won't be the high scalable business. It won't be like the sexy thing to do. It won't be the high margin business, right? So essentially what I'm saying is like, okay, we're doing hands-on implementation. The prices are pretty high because it's hard to do. Businesses are paying a lot of money for that. Because the prices are high, that means that the model providers who are buying the chips from NVIDIA are making a lot of money, and they're able to, spend that money to buy more and more chips. And so the economy as a whole stays propped up on AI, essentially. But the moment where, OpenAI is not getting as much revenue because it's not going to cost as much, and so they need fewer chips, potentially, I don't know if that's going to be how it plays out. I need to think on this a little bit more, which is why I didn't continue to go down on like the second bubble. But I definitely see it's just going to be price corrections downstream, right? Really expensive, more affordable, democratized, like available to everybody. Like LLMs are that way, but we're talking about end-to-end application applied AI type products, right? So that's it. Life after the AI bubble, I think, is going to be positive if you're in the AI space, if you're working with businesses, if you're building like real valuable products, like if you're building solutions that provide real value. And I think when it pops, there's probably going to be some constraint on demand, maybe, but it's going to be ultimately up to us, the people who are actually, on the front lines, applying this technology to real business. How fast can we actually build these solutions that provide this transformation we're talking about, and how many people can we do it for, right? If we can sprint on this, as a community, and get everybody on board before the bubble bursts, then when the bubble bursts, it's not going to be that big of a deal, right? We'll probably forget about it at that point. So that's it for today.